Most people think that working harder and doing more is how you get better results. I recently had a conversation in which I dove into the specifics of this with my creative director, Molly. The reality that I found in my coaching practice is that people are working harder, doing a lot of stuff that doesn't actually add value. So we dove into one of my favorite things to talk about, which is the flip and how it transforms how we can add value together.
Hey everyone, so I'm here with Karen today, and we're going to dive into something that might change the way that you think about leadership. So, I think it was last week we were having a conversation about this one client that you now work extensively with, but who at the
Right,
time was a prospective client. So, this
right.
was on a sales call, and you were telling me about the way that you think about organizations, about businesses,
Mhm.
is different from other leadership coaches.
So he was telling me all about what he had going on and what he wanted help with. And I said, most leaders and consultants think about organizations like a factory, like a machine. And people are cogs in the machine of production, and we're trying to make it more efficient. And what I said to him is, I don't work like that. I think of an organization like a forest, like a living organism where there's living things that you care about and you tend to that are a part of that organization, and you're working to cultivate healthy functioning.
How did he receive that?
It was perfect because it addressed a specific need that he had, which is he wanted to create more scaffolding, more structure within the organization to support it growing, to scale it so that they could work on more projects and hire more employees and do more of the good work that they do. But he was concerned that in adding the scaffolding, they would suffocate out the aliveness of the culture that they have, the fun, the innovation, the retention that they have with their employees because of their culture. And so the idea of working and looking at his organization like a forest was super appealing because it's like, yeah, that aliveness that we have is what we want to preserve as we add structure. So that's what we're doing now. And it's really a lot of fun.
And how long have you guys been working together now at this point?
It's just at 2 years I've been working with them.
And how has this kind of applying the force metaphor manifested for them? What are
It
some benefits that they've experienced?
it's acknowledged with people, and I'll hear it in meetings. Like, just last week, the VP of Business Development was saying, "Yeah, we're a forest, not a factory." He, like, actually said those words. I didn't even know he had heard that, but it's affected the culture in terms of how they're thinking about how they're growing. And so we are adding structure and we're adding processes and systems that allow for their strategy to be operationalized. But we're doing it in a way where the relationships between people are emphasized so that there's warmth and care and the things that allow them to be innovative and creative in a way that sets them apart from other engineering companies.
You've also dove into the history
Mhm.
behind mechanistic organizational thinking. Can we
Right.
dive into how we ended up in this situation?
So we ended up here because of the Industrial Revolution, which was hugely successful in many ways. There was this guy, Frederick Taylor, like 1880 to 1915 is about when he was alive. He was a mechanical engineer and he was working in industrial settings trying to optimize efficiency within a factory. And so he was studying repetitive movement of people on the factory floor. So he was measuring how much time does it take to reach over here and put something here and that kind of thing. He was literally thinking of people as cogs in a machine of production and trying to make that more efficient. I think of it as academic ways of trying to optimize organizations. The thinking is very rational, the thinking is very academic. And so people get treated in inhumane ways when this happens. And I think for me, a lot of the backlash that we're seeing from people, it's an indication that people are fed up with this kind of stuff and they don't want to be treated like this
Yeah.
anymore.
All the phenomena like quiet quitting, for example.
I think it's also tied into the pushback against diversity initiatives and social justice warriors and stuff like that. It's coming from academia. And so it's let me give you the statistics about how diversity is happening and you need to behave differently because of this. It doesn't mean it's not true what they're saying, but it's we need to do this in a way where we're respectful of each other,
Mhm.
and the fact that everybody needs to be a part of whatever it is that we're moving forward to try to create.
Yeah, it's a lot of treating people, as human beings rather than statistics, or otherwise they just show up as automatons in a
Exactly.
way. And I think the modern day example of this is Amazon. So they have a warehouse worker monitoring system tracking every movement, timing
Yes.
bathroom breaks, and automatically
Yep.
generating warnings if workers fall behind prescribed metrics. So
Mm.
that's essentially what you're talking about, right?
It's absolutely it's Frederick Taylor all over again. And he died
Yeah.
in 1915.
Wow.
So just think about how, and Amazon's super successful doing this. And I'm not saying that these mechanized ways of doing things, I'm not saying it's bad. What I'm saying is doing that and only that in the absence of human connection is where the problems arise. What Amazon is doing is not sustainable. I don't know what their retention rates are like. I don't have data about that. But what I could say is it's not humane.
You have your own educational background on this. What was that like when you were pursuing your master's in?
Yeah, and organization development. So my undergraduate's in computer science, and then I ended up getting a master's in organization development. And so I think mechanistically, I think in a systems way, and I was trained to think like this. So computer science is computer systems, organization development is organizations as systems.
Mhm.
Most of the training that I got was mechanistic. So you get a map of all the different parts of an organization and you imagine how they relate to each other and how they connect. And I think of it as a very academic, very complicated, very slow way of working on improving an organization that gets you into maybe a steady state of functioning like Amazon, but it's terrible when there's any kind of change or need for innovation. It doesn't create resilience within an organization that's needed when things are changing and chaotic and uncertain and volatile, right? It's those kinds of situations where you really see the difference between factory and forest.
So
Forest is resilient. You can have a tornado come through and things break, and then 2 or 3 days later, new life just coming back. You don't
mhm.
see that when a factory gets mowed over.
Yeah, and it gets completely destroyed.
It gets
Yeah.
destroyed. And then so that's the difference between a complicated system, a factory, and a complex living organism, the forest. The resiliency and ability to adapt and evolve are completely different.
Mm.
Yeah.
So if we're not robots in a factory, then are we more like trees?
We are. So, yeah, we're more like a trees. So, we could think of an oak tree. I have a huge oak tree in my front yard, and it's really interesting to look at the canopy of the leaves, and you can literally see where the roots go to around that tree because only certain things can grow within that canopy of the tree because there's so much competition for water. The tree is sucking up lots of water. And so you need a really resilient plant to thrive within the canopy of that oak tree. So it's like a tree in a forest creates a certain kind of environment that some plants can thrive in and some plants don't thrive in.
Mhm. How does that apply to leadership?
We could think of ourselves like trees as leaders. And I look at formal leaders and informal leaders. I think everybody is a leader, at least of their own life. For formal leaders, it's really important to think about how you're showing up. Am I showing up like a big ass oak tree? Where I'm sucking all the resources, or am I showing up more like a prairie flower where lots of different flowers can thrive with me in this meadow? And sometimes you might want to be an oak and sometimes you might want to be a prairie flower.
So is it not necessarily a bad thing to be the oak tree that's sucking up all the resources?
Yeah, it's you have that happening in nature all the
Mhm.
time.
Mhm.
And a pine forest is very different than an old growth forest. The old growth forests tend to be big oak trees or any kind of hardwood, and they're much farther apart than the pines because they need more space. So the environment is just different so that those kinds of trees can thrive. A pine forest, just it looks very different. The trees are all crammed together and you have more understory because there's less competition for light. If I'm a leader, what kind of tree do I want to be that cultivates the growth and performance of people around me so that they can thrive?
What would be an example of when it's beneficial to be that big oak tree versus being, say, a wildflower?
It's like if it's really important for there to be space for other plants to thrive, you don't want to be the big oak. And maybe we could use the kinds of leadership that, like, just very simplistic. You could think of it as command and control. Like the oak tree is a command and control leader that's just there and it dominates and it tells people what to do. And then a pine tree or a prairie flower could be more like a participative leader that's inviting other people to come in and work together in a collaborative way.
So you're saying there's a time and place for both, and you need to be able to.
Absolutely. There's a thing called situational leadership where it's pretty well known in leadership circles that you train people to show up differently based on what the situation calls for. Sometimes you want to be more directive, sometimes you want to be more invitational and participative in how
Okay.
you lead.
Then this brings me to my next question, which is, okay, great. So Karen wants me to be a tree.
Right,
But what am I
right.
supposed to do with that, when I walk into the office on a Monday morning and say I'm the marketing director and I'm checking in with my team? I got my graphic designer, I got my clients, I've got my
Mhm.
marketing associates, I got my strategist, and they're all there with me. I'm leading the check-in. How do I apply this tree forest metaphor to my Monday morning?
So, what I want you to do, Molly, is I want you to, before you even walk in the door, before you've even left your house, I want you to check in with yourself and say, How am I feeling? Have I woken up grumpy and irritable? Am I feeling relaxed and looking forward to work today? And then do whatever it is that you need to do to get yourself in a place where you're feeling good about moving forward. Excited, anticipating what you're doing, but also not bringing anxiety with you. And if you are, that's fine. That's being human, but be aware of how you're feeling so that you can manage that when you show up in that room with your team.
And if I'm not able to shake off whatever anxiety that I'm feeling, do I share that with my team?
Yeah, it depends on what the rhythm is that you've established with them. The leaders that I work with are able to share honestly with their team and to say, I had a rough weekend and share. What was your weekend like? And that's a way to do a check in where you're connecting with people in a way where it's an authentic and real connection.
Mm,
You can share it in a way where it doesn't inhibit performance at all. If you've
yeah.
never done this before, it could be scary. Like you need to establish a rhythm of this kind of honest connecting with people.
Yeah. Speaking of real, let's move into some real world examples because I'd love to hear stories
Okay.
from in the field from your life
Mhm.
that demonstrate this in action. Could you give us two examples? One where we're looking at a factory based kind of culture, and
Oh,
another example that really does exemplify that oak tree forest kind of leadership style.
so I'm thinking of one client that was actually like a factory, so a metal manufacturing company that I worked with at one point where that they had different sites that had different kinds of manufacturing that they did. They did all kinds of different metal fabrication. And one of the sites was more mechanistic. The factory was older. And so the equipment was older and their processes were older. And that particular site had a general manager running it. I was brought in to work with the chief strategy officer to bring lean manufacturing processes across their facilities. And she was struggling because there had been a lot of resistance. So I was bringing leadership in at each site to be able to lead lean manufacturing at the sites. So as we went into this one site, it became very clear as we started digging into it that the way this person had been running it in a command and control, oak tree dominating sort of way, didn't allow issues within the equipment, within the facility, personnel issues, building, like the actual building itself issues, so that there was no way we were going to be able to bring in lean manufacturing practices because they weren't equipped to be able to receive and do anything. They had to resolve issues that he had been hiding before we could even get in there and do anything. So that was a longer process. And we were less successful there because there was just more to overcome.
Mhm.
Compare that with another site that was actually a newer facility, had less issues, and also a leader, a general manager there who was more participative, more like a Forrest in the way he invited other people to be leaders. He was already inviting leadership from other people where we could bring the lean manufacturing practices in with some leadership development
Mhm.
that allowed people to be even more a part of what was going on.
So, what would you say was the most dramatic, stark contrast between these two leaders?
It was in the people around them where you could see the difference. The forest oriented one, the people around him were happier.
Mm,
They were more resourceful and resilient in their ability to solve problems. They were more willing to work longer hours, actually.
amazing.
Yeah, because they knew it wouldn't lead into them being taken advantage of. They knew that they would have times of rest where it wouldn't be as intense.
How did that compare to the people around the command and control style
Yeah,
leader?
they were I talked with people at every level of that organization, and they're good people, all of them, and they wanted to do well, but they were beat up. They were less able to, be creative because they were in more of a survival mode because of the situation they were in.
Yeah, they didn't have that resiliency of the forest that you were talking about earlier,
They
it sounds like.
didn't.
So that's a great example of how resiliency shows up
Mhm.
in the real world under two very different styles of leadership. You have one set of
Right,
people who was willing to work more hours if need be,
right,
and they didn't complain about it. Then whereas the others, they didn't have it in them. They didn't have that energy or that drive.
yeah, and it's very real, and it's not the employee's fault. And I've seen things on social media where people are saying, like, "Don't ask me to be resilient." Like like, "You're already asking enough of me." And that's a very legitimate response. Like, "Oh, the answer is for you to be more resilient." It's, "Look, I've given you my blood and my firstborn, right? Like, I don't have any more to give you." You don't get to resiliency from mechanistic ways of working. You don't. But resiliency is something that comes naturally when we're connected.
Yeah.
That's the difference between a factory and a forest, is that there's connection between the organisms that make up the forest. It's not
Yeah.
just the tree. It's the water, it's the weather, it's the air, it's all the things. And so
Mhm.
you learn to cultivate all the things when you're looking at an organization like a forest.
It sounds like all of that cultivation, that connectivity, that humanity essentially are prerequisites in an organizational culture that then earn you resiliency from your
Exactly.
people. Is that
Yeah.
fair to say?
Absolutely. And then you get the kinds of qualities that you would have in a living system. So it becomes able to self organize, it becomes self healing like a forest. A machine in a factory doesn't heal itself, it has to come in and be fixed. A person in a forest kind of organization, you don't want to go in and try to fix people in a forest environment. You support them in order to do their own healing work so that they can show up. And it doesn't mean that you don't support them, but the self healing becomes a natural part of the way you function.
Okay, so then this is where some tools or resources might be helpful.
Mm.
Can you share something with our audience that we could use to apply to start moving more in the direction of becoming more of that culture?
Yeah. Yeah. So what you and I talked about sharing was this tool I call the flip, where you as a leader become aware of when it is you're in a reactive state, which we call drama, And when it is, you're in a more relaxed, responsive state. And I'm specifically talking about nervous system states and physiological states. So it's mind, nervous system, body states. And you cannot think your way through this. You have to be in connection with your body and yourself when you navigate this. So the flip is when you're able to recognize when you're locked into some sort of reactivity where your nervous system is either amped up or maybe collapsed. Those are the two general states that you can be in that indicate some sort of a fear response is going on underneath what you're doing. When you're in a fear response, you tend to be protective and defensive and interact with other people in very transactional kinds of ways where you're not connecting with them. You get into a situation where you say to somebody like, just give me my stuff. You're not able to relax enough to really connect with them. So when you're able to see within yourself, whether you're in drama, one of those two reactive states, or responsive, you can then move to more and more, shift to more and more functioning like a forest yourself in the way that you show up, where you're more responsive than reactive.
I'm assuming there's a reason why you call it the flip, right?
Yeah, it's when you flip between being reactive and responsive. And whenever I introduce this to people, Molly, there's always this thing of, okay, reactive is bad. And I'm going to try to not be reactive. And that's very typical. And I don't usually say right and wrong, but it's wrong because reactive is normal. It's normal to be reactive because it's a built in physiological response that's a part of us being human beings.
So you don't want to suppress your reactions.
You don't want to suppress your reactions. What you want to do is welcome them, allow them to happen, and then have enough access to your best self, to your responsive states, so that you can be with your reactivity in a loving, self-loving, and compassionate way where you're accepting what's going on. And what's amazing about that is it allows that reactivity to usually to resolve fairly quickly, unless it's something big, in which case somebody like me can talk you off the ledge and talk you through that and get back into your center. But the flip is about moving between reactive and responsive states. And there's a woman at Stanford, I can't remember her name. She wrote a book called Willpower, and she actually has done research that shows that this moving back and forth physiologically within your body, it increases your willpower. So it increases your heart rate variability. So think of being contracted in reactivity or relaxed and expansive in responsiveness. And it's just like exercising the muscles, like lifting weights. And you gain strength when you do that. This is the same psychologically and physiologically in terms of willpower, flipping between reactive and responsive.
Can we talk about what it actually looks like to apply the flip in a real world, real life leadership situation?
Okay. So I'm thinking about one of my clients, not CTO, but a level below in a 6,000 person organization who was responsible for rolling out digital transformation across the organization. And so he had many different customers across several different business units and was really excited to prove himself in this position. He was actually wanting the CTO position. He was pushing the digital transformation within the organization, but getting a lot of feedback that he wasn't doing a great job. So I was brought in to be his executive coach to help him be more successful in what he was doing. And I ended up interviewing a bunch of people who had been working with him. It became pretty clear once I started talking with people what was going on. I just asked him, how anxious are you about being successful as you're talking with these people?
I want to pause right there. What led
Yeah.
you to ask that question specifically? Was there something that you were noticing?
The thing that I noticed was in the data, people said that he talked more than he listened.
Wow.
He was going to help them with the digital transformation, but he had more to say than he was actually connecting with them and listening to them.
So
And
what from that data, what did you conclude?
I concluded that he was afraid.
And that's what led you to ask that specific question.
I
Got
also knew the pressure he was under, and I knew how much he cared and how much he wanted that CTO role, but he wasn't an egotistical kind of person at all. He wanted to serve, he wanted to be successful, and he wanted his people to be, more than anything, his people to be successful in the digital transformation.
What did he say though when you asked? What was his response? I'm
His
curious.
first response was, "No, I'm not anxious."
Really? So he was in denial.
Well, but we're all in denial all the time about being reactive and about drama. And so I expect that. I'm an executive coach. I'm used to poking in these things with people. And it's like, well, here's what the data says. What do you think is going on here?
How did you get him to see and understand that he was actually being anxious?
I think I ended up challenging him pretty,
Oh, wow.
pretty,
Okay. So it
like,
it took some pushing.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Got it.
and that's what I do. But people hire me to help with when things are sticky like this,
Mm,
and I can do it in a way that's not judgmental. The issue is when we are anxious and we're pushing and things become transactional and we can't recognize that we're being human and we have to be perfect. At some point, it's like you have to do your work to recognize when you're causing a situation to become exhausting and transactional and
uh-huh.
impersonal, what that does to a situation and how it devolves from a caring and compassionate situation into something that's mechanistic.
Mhm,
And you lose what's beautiful and sacred about life when you show up in that way, and you
mhm.
lose your ability to be effective.
So then this leader clearly was not being effective because of his anxiety. You got him to recognize that
Yes.
eventually.
Yes,
So then
eventually we did. Yes.
what happened after that? Like, how did you help him apply the flip?
So, my course, the Define Your True Self course, is an 8-week program that guides people in the flip. It's like we do the flip over and over again. So, he went through that program, and there's mindfulness that's a part of that that guides people to recognize when they're being reactive and when they're responsive so that you can start learning to navigate the flip yourself. We know that it takes 21 days to create a habit. That's why the course is designed to be longer than that so that you get really good support in being able to make this flip. And then people have access to the material and the mindfulness practices afterwards so
Mhm.
that they can keep practicing doing the flip. But it takes practice.
So what was his experience like going through the course and learning how to apply the flip?
It was really good. He was very successful. So he started showing up more relaxed, more confident, more innovative in the way he was relating to his team. And then they were able to show up more at their best. His whole team was able to do that. And they moved forward at speed with the digital transformation. They were able to roll it out and have it be delivered.
And what were the difference between him after taking the course in the digital transformation project versus before?
Yeah, he had more fun in what he was doing. He was more relaxed, he was more confident. Our coaching sessions shifted, and there was a trust, obviously, that got created between he and I. This was a big thing to get through. When you go into drama like this with people and you end up creating real connections that, again, are more resilient, and it's like you never forget someone
Mhm.
when you go through something difficult like that and come out the other side feeling better about yourself and your ability to get done what needs to get done.
And then I'm curious, did he end up getting the CTO position?
He did not.
He did not.
He did not. And he was okay with that. I
Uh-huh.
checked in with him recently and he's doing really well. He found another place where he could
Okay.
shine. He needed a different environment that recognized he is someone who is not transactional ultimately in any way. Somebody who's full of life, full of love, full of Jesus, like really truly full
Uh-huh.
of Jesus
Yeah,
in the best way. And he needed a place that could embrace that and allow him to be
I
that
see.
in the world.
Yeah, and I think that's all part of authentic leadership.
It is exactly. super competent technically.
Yeah.
And as a leader, sometimes we need to move the plants around to get in the right
Yeah.
environment, move the
Yeah.
people around. And I encourage that with people. Like when you're a leader, you have more ability to influence the environment. So please, if you're a C suite person, take responsibility for that and cultivate the kind of environment that people can thrive in to do what
Yeah.
it is that you want to do. If you're within the organization, you're struggling to align with what's going on, then it may be that it's not the right place for you to thrive.
Right.
So it's really hard when people get stuck in a particular place and think that's their only option. It's
Yeah.
always good to be kind of looking and is this still the best place for me to be? And what do I actually need to thrive?
Yeah.
And take
Yeah.
responsibility for that.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing about authenticity is it can be difficult at times to admit or embrace a certain aspect or a part of yourself that you might be afraid you will get rejected for.
Oh,
Like in this guy's case, he had a lot of Jesus going on, and that can be a beautiful thing. But
it's
maybe
beautiful. Yeah.
at the organization he was at previously, that was just not really embraced, I'm assuming. You know what I mean?
No.
So did he eventually find a place where he could be
Yeah,
his self? Yeah.
he has. When we talk about diversity,
Yeah.
that's what it really should be. There's certain things we need to address within the way we function as a society. When we are reactive, what ends up happening is that people get into the fear state, right? So when you're in a fear state, the primal experience of that is you're out to get me, and either you're going to eat me or I'm going to beat you down and survive.
Yeah, it's dog eat dog.
It's dog eat dog, and it sets up an unconscious dynamic of winners and losers, either or thinking. So, as long as we are in a reactive state, we tend to get caught up in scarcity thinking where it's either I win or you win. Most people are not aware of that. So, what we want to have happen is we have to make sure, if we want true diversity, like real diversity, that includes everyone, where we can have enough people showing up at their best in
Mhm.
that responsive mind body nervous system that allows for both and thinking to happen,
Yeah.
that then allows us to welcome different perspectives truly, especially the ones we disagree with, or especially the ones that make us uncomfortable. I'm not advocating for a world where we all get along because we all think the same. That's not the way a forest functions.
Going back to that example of our Jesus loving leader, could we have like a coworker of his be a staunch atheist? What would it look like? Would a forest based organization allow for both of these leaders to coexist? How would that play out?
Absolutely. I have
And not just coexist, but to co-work, like
yeah,
collaborate.
exactly. Which is my thing. Like I really don't like that bumper sticker coexist. I really don't, because it's like, oh, let's just tolerate each other. Like I want to blow that up and have it be let's actually celebrate the atheist and the Jesus together, because it's way more interesting. A forest is resilient because of biodiversity. That's what we need to have happening in organizations. So it's, oh, isn't this interesting? These different perspectives that we bring to situations that allow us to see more of the whole of what's going on, because one of us is an atheist and one of us loves Jesus.
Yeah. So how do you create the conditions for that then?
The common ground that I bring people to is life force energy. I'm alive, you're alive, and in this aliveness, we're connected. Some people call it the interdependent web of life. If you come at it from a science perspective, if you come at it from a theological perspective, it's like we're all one in God. It's similar dynamics that are going, I think it's the same dynamics going on. It's like we're all connected here in life on this planet. So the common ground that I talk about is aliveness, life force energy. We're all alive. We all feel better and function better when we feel alive and we're turned on and we're ready to give our gifts, and we are working together to align gifts in service to something useful that we're doing as an organization, something that creates value for a customer, And we're all doing that value creation together.
regardless of whatever differences we may have. Okay, so all this talk about authenticity does remind me of an example that I recently went through in
Right.
my own professional
Right.
life where I was working with a client and it was a remote distributed team. And I was working with one of the directors. She was one of my direct contacts, and she happened to be based in San Francisco. And
Okay.
on this particular call, we had been working for about 2 months or so. She was going to introduce me to her marketing associate. So this is somebody who was reporting to her. She wanted to just establish that rapport so that I could work with both of them. I jumped on the call. It was the three of us, and we were waiting for another person to jump on. In the meantime, I was like, okay, let me just engage in some chit chat. Why not?
Okay. Nice.
And because I used to live in San Francisco, I know how much of a foodie city it is. So I immediately jumped into that and I was like, oh, so you guys are both in San Francisco? And they were like, yes. And then I said, how often do you guys meet up for lunch meetings? Because there's just so much good food there.
Yeah.
And it was like this, speaking of forest, right? There's like this tree that just dropped.
Funny.
And it was, they just completely froze up, went into automaton mode and didn't know how to answer because the
Mhm.
answer was that they said, "Oh, we don't really meet up." And I was just like, I was just kind of shocked
Right.
because if I were to put myself in either one of those seats, either as the associate or the director, I of course would have put it out there like, "Hey, we should meet up sometime." Like,
Yeah.
I love this such and such, I don't know, French bakery place. Let's meet up there
Mhm.
later this afternoon.
Mhm.
So it just boggled my mind that
Right.
that wasn't even an option, despite the fact that these people work pretty closely together and have been working for a number of months apparently. So I guess my question is like, what is what first of all, what do you think of a situation like that where it's like people are just so constricted that they're
Y
not allowed
yeah.
to be authentic?
Yeah. I think it's probably a good idea to come back and check our assumptions on something like that. So it's like
Mhm.
San Francisco is huge. It could be like one person's on one side of the bay and one person on the other side of the bay.
That's true.
And right. Like, so they could be not proximal to each other. It could be that there's maybe some underlying conflict. That could be something where they like, maybe they don't like each other. And so they're just trying to get along. It
Mhm.
could be that they're working on different things and there's not a sense of needing to do a lot of
That's
coordination.
true. That's fair.
Right? There's so many different things that could be going on. That I think that's the
But
kind of
not even
situation.
like once a quarter?
I know, I know.
You
Right,
know what I
well,
mean?
it's a really great example of what happens in mechanistic kinds of organizations
Mhm.
where the normal relational kind of stuff starts to feel indulgent and frivolous and not needed. When the fact is, tending to relationships is the foundation of any healthy living organism.
Mhm.
The forest is relational. It's constantly talking and connecting. And it's trees to trees to other plants. It's everything is in contact and communicating. And the more science does research on this, the more there is evidence about what this looks like. Trees
Does
like literally feed each other nutrients to help
Yeah.
support each other.
You're basically advocating for being more relational.
Totally. It's the basis of any healthy functioning.
Yeah. So how would you even start to implement that in a culture like this, like where I brought up in this San Francisco startup,
Right.
where it's clear that the culture is already so entrenched with
Right.
a strong bias for being professional over being authentic?
When I look at an organization as a system, I'm always looking at the identity of the organization, which is the
Hmm.
same as the brand. And so, when from a leadership perspective, we want everyone within an organization to be plugged into the identity of the organization as a whole. So, we have a shared identity. That's that common ground that we're coming from, like a best self orientation for both the individuals and the organization. So, it's coming from that place, which is your brand, leadership wise. So, everyone's living that. Marketing is where your brand gets implemented into how it is that you build awareness about what it is that you have to offer. So, with this kind of situation, I would want to start with so, what are you accomplishing in this organization? What are you here to, what value are you creating? And then how does the marketing department serve that? And how are people within this department either showing up in alignment with that brand as their best self in responsive mode or not? And what kinds of adjustments might be needed individually, leadership wise, and then more technically in terms of how what their understanding of the brand is and the technical parts of marketing that would allow them to execute marketing in an effective way. But then addressing whatever challenges. So when we are coming from our best self, we're more able to address drama, challenges that are happening, and learn from them so that we can improve what we're doing.
So let's bring it back to the actual two people in this situation, right? Let's assume that I am that associate, right? I'm not in a power position in that
Right,
situation.
right.
So how would I then start to implement more of a forest culture, more being more relationalist?
Bottom line is that it takes practice every day in doing the flip. So noticing when you're reactive, accepting the fact that's happening. Sometimes people call that a breath of acceptance. Like just take a deep breath. I'm reactive. Oh. And
Yeah.
then bring yourself back to your responsive best self.
So would the noticing in that situation be like, "Oh, I'm noticing that I'm being a bit of an automaton," or I'm I'm noticing that I'm being stiff right now. I'm noticing a discomfort
Abs-
right now.
Absolutely. And there's so many different ways. I'm noticing I'm feeling a sense of urgency.
Mm,
This is something more that comes up with people more than I would like. People are saying to me, I feel stressed every day, all day.
what do you do with that?
There's the individual part of it, and then there's the environmental part of it.
Right,
It
right,
takes the leaders being willing to make changes within those organizing elements and the way the senior leaders are showing up
right.
to create. So as an individual contributor or a person within an organization, there's only so much you can do. But
Okay,
there's
so that is a thing then.
it totally is a thing.
Okay.
And the more you do to learn how to do this for yourself within your life, the more you can become that kind of leader that can create that for an org. One of my
Mhm,
clients is a CEO that I've worked with for over 20 years. She did not start out as a CEO. She started out with her own business and then in a CFO role. And then I've just have followed her wherever she has gone. And every step of the way, she's building her capacity to do what she's doing now, which is to be a CEO of a forest organization.
mm,
So it's like a real life MBA program that comes from learning how to be a living organism in your own life. Recognize yourself as that already. It's who you are inherently. Experiment and play with bringing that into the world. The more you can do the flip, the more fulfilled and effective you'll be, and the more that you can add value. I've captured doing the flip over and over again in my Define Your True Self course. It's 8 weeks long, enough time for the flip to become a habit. It's one of the ways that we've made sure that everyone is adding value. You can learn more about the Define Your True Self course at imx.one.